there's this recurring confusion that if you get a second residence permit or if you get a second citizenship, like that's where your banking needs to go. That's where you need to move all your money. That's part of the deal and that's just what you're going to do. And that's not true. So today I'm going to give you some specific examples to understand how to live, be a citizen, and bank and invest in different places. So let me just give you some specific examples, right? We have people who go through Caribbean Citizenship by Investment programs and they're like, okay, we've determined that Dominica is the best second citizenship for me. And then they'll say, so like, does that mean I need to get a bank account in Dominica? Or they'll be one step ahead and say, well, I don't really feel comfortable moving my money to Dominica. Like maybe we could get a citizenship in like Malta or something for like 9 times the price. Like, would you be open to doing that? I'm like, wait a second, right? Where you're a citizen doesn't mean where you should bank. Another example, we'll have people like, oh, I want to move to Mexico. So how do I get a bank account in Mexico? It's like, well, you probably don't want to do that. Like Mexico, they've got some banks that are financially strong, but just not really the best place in the world to bank for a number of different reasons, especially if you're living there. And so what I want you to understand is that where you live and where you're a citizen, we've talked about how those things can be separate, right? Maybe you get citizenship in Dominica, and then you go to whatever your embassy is, and you get your Mexican residence as a Dominican citizen, because you don't want to live in Dominica, but it gives you the backup citizenship, and then you live in Mexico. But on top of that, don't think that you need to open bank accounts there. There are some specific examples where you need to, but I'm going to tell you what you need to know. If it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors figure this whole thing out. I've done it myself. I understand how holistic it needs to be. I'm sick and tired of people who are passport salespeople just selling you passports like a shiny bauble. You don't need a shiny bauble. You need a plan. You need to know how you can reduce your taxes, diversify and protect your assets, bring more freedom into your life, and protect yourself from all the chaos going on in the world. You can learn more about how that works in our very unique approach at nomadcapitalist.com. And by the way, it's such a unique approach that some days my mind just explodes trying to manage and train and drive the 60 people who work here, because no other company on earth would have trained them for what we are doing. So I've told you in the past, my father talked in the mid-1990s about moving overseas, and we talked about Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina. 3 of the 4 probably would have worked out pretty well, at least for a generation. Back then, the deal was, hey, we're selling our house in the U.S. I guess we'll move our money out of the bank. Like, we'll do everything out of the U.S., and we're going to move it to Australia. You don't really need to do that anymore. This is back in the same mid-1990s. I've referenced the movie numerous times, Entourage, because it features a sign at the newly built Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, right? I spent a lot of time in Kuala Lumpur. It looks a lot different now than it looked in that movie. And so if you would have been watching that movie, I think that was like late 90s, you would have been like, I'm not putting my money in this country. I'm not buying a house in this country. I'm not going to this, what? It's like a village, right? It's basically Petronas Towers surrounded by a village. The place is like, you can't see the Petronas Towers from almost anywhere anymore. There's just so much building going on. It's so dynamic. And so I'm not saying Malaysia is the best place to open a bank account, and if you're not a resident there, they're probably not going to open a bank account for you. But the point being is that compared to then to now, you get so many more opportunities of where you can go, to where the play is diversification. And so I'm not saying if you want to move to Mexico, don't open a small bank account. If you like, okay, I need to pay some bills, I got to hook it up to auto pay, whatever the case may be. I have a house in Georgia, and so the bills just automatically pay as long as I keep enough Lari in there. I just move in like 3 years of Lari into that account, and they just debit every month, and I just literally never think about the property. And so I'm open to doing that. I'm open if you want to just have an account to keep some cash. And if you're in a country like Georgia where it's a pretty safe country, no cartels are coming to ask who has money, banks are traded on the London Stock Exchange, like, okay, fine, keep an account there with some cash. But if I have $100 million, I'm not putting, all of it or half of it in a Georgian bank. I'm just not. And so let's go through how to handle where to bank where you have citizenship, and how to handle banking where you have residence. So on citizenship, here's the point of diversification, is distributed control. The reason you're getting a second citizenship, whether it's by investment or you're claiming it through your family tree, or we've talked endlessly about all the different options, is you want to have distributed control over your life. You want to take back control. And so if you have just one citizenship, they can cancel your passport. They can stop you from leaving the country. They can stop you from coming back to the country. They can tax you. They can impose new rules. They can do retroactive. They can do all kinds of things that they want. And so if you have 2 passports, you're at least in the driver's seat. I can tell you the feeling when you get that second passport for the very first time. It changes something inside of you. You feel it. You can't imagine it until it happens. You feel a sense of freedom. And so the point of diversification is distributed control. And so the issue people have is like, oh, well, I don't want to when they try and conflate living and banking, they'll say like, oh, this country over here, maybe one of the banking havens, they don't have as much freedom of speech as I want. It's like, well, that's great. You're not going to live there. You're not going to be complaining. So treat it for what it is as a banking haven, and let it be, like let it serve you. Right now, we have people who are living in Canada who are concerned because they know people who've had bank accounts frozen in the last year when they started just freezing and closing bank accounts. By the way, Canada was long closing people's bank accounts. If you were, for example, like an immigrant from certain countries they didn't like, they would open an account and they'd be like, you're from Iraq, screw you. But I'm a Canadian citizen, we don't care. So what happened in 2022 was not the first time that happened in Canada. So, but understand that affected you because you were a Canadian citizen, Canadian resident, Canadian taxpayer, and Canadian bank account holder, right? I bank in Canada. I don't keep a lot of money there. Maybe I should start getting some of it out. But I said, I'm not really in a rush to get it out because it's a point of diversification. It's in one of the 20 strongest banks in the world. I guess if they do a bail-in, I'm under any limit that I would imagine we bailed in. If they do, then so be it. But it's such a small amount of money. But I'm not living there. Now, maybe I'm the loudmouth on YouTube who's like, all right, we got to go to this loudmouth. But I generally speaking, if you're just a person living outside of Canada, what issue are you going to get yourself into? I'm not saying don't follow the rules. I'm saying that what rules are you not going to follow by banking in a place where you barely go, right? I bank in Singapore. I don't live in Singapore. I have no other business there. What they do is their business. I live next door in Malaysia. I live other places. And so you have distributed control because you're living, being a citizen and banking somewhere else. And so the issue of freedom of speech to me doesn't really make a difference. What also makes a good citizenship is make a good bank. And so people get confused. They're like, oh, well, if I'm going to be a citizen of Antigua, I should have a bank account there. Citizenship by investment, for example, is a mere tool of convenience. That's why politicians hate it. You send them a donation, for example, they send you a passport. Simple as that. 4 of the 5 countries in the Caribbean that do it never even require you to ever set foot in the country. So why is a country that you would never set foot in, why should that be a good candidate for banking? They're good at citizenship. They're good at one thing, right? Countries compartmentalize. So their benefit is, hey, we're a small country. We used to have an offshore banking sector. The powers that be around the world shut it down. We used to have an offshore corporate center. They didn't like that either. So we have how are we going to bring in some money, right? We have citizenship. We've got good citizenships. You can travel to a lot of countries with it. So we're going to sell them. And we're going to make them available through this investment program where you bring in money. And I think the best one is donation, which is why I mention it. But they're banks, right? I mean, you're in the U.S. hemisphere. So there are more questions to be asked. The fees are generally higher. It's just not a robust banking center. And again, the banking center has become so much more diversified. You're going to have a lot more nimble experience banking in Georgia, for example, which didn't exist, right, back in the late 1990s. Nobody would be banking in Georgia then. You'd have a much more nimble experience banking in Georgia than you will banking in Antigua, for example. It's just not really very versatile. So why would you think that because a country's good at one thing, it's good at the other thing? Only because you've been living in one country where, again, you're citizen, resident, taxpayer, bank, everything is there, and that's the paradigm. No, that's not the paradigm. So a country that's good for citizenship probably isn't good for something else. If you want to bank in Malta, be my guest. The banks there are a little finicky, but I guess they function. They do function. I don't think there's a problem with them. I'm just saying, is that the best place to bank? I don't know. But at least it'll be more functional than the Caribbean, for example. And so what makes a good citizenship to me is it's free, they leave you alone, they're not going to impose some kind of global citizenship, taxation, they potentially are tax friendly or have an option to be tax friendly. They're a country people haven't heard of a lot, maybe it's more remote, maybe if you're someone who's worried about the coming famine or something, it's a place that has good food, you could live there if you have to, but you're not necessarily going to. Are those the same things that make a good bank, right? Not necessarily, right? And so if you want to bank in Switzerland, for example, Switzerland's a nearly impossible citizenship to get. If you don't learn the language, if you live there 12 years, everyone votes. Are you Swiss enough? Is that what you want to do? But you can bank there. I happen to think that some of that culture blends over into the banking systems where they're efficient. That's probably more of it's a legacy brand banking destination. But, what's a good bank? What's a good citizenship? Where you have residence is another issue. So people think, I'm going to move to a country, I should have banking there. Again, it depends on the country. Right, and so when I'm in Malaysia, for example, I don't think I ever use a Malaysian credit card because credit card acceptance is good. I can just scan an Amex card or a MasterCard from another country, and no problems. Turkey, for example, and maybe a few other countries, I'm trying to think what they are. They like local cards, and so if I was going to live in Turkey, for example, I would probably use a local card. I would forgo. As a former American, I can still get the miles and the points, not that I use them very much. I would forgo that and I would just get a local card and just deal with a local bank and I would just move money in from somewhere else, right? So if I'm living in a place where I have to have a local bank account to survive, I'm gonna maybe have a salary put in there if that works with my tax plan. Doesn't always, but it could. I'm going to remit some money to myself, maybe once a month or maybe once a year. In a country like Thailand, people tend to remit money to themselves once a year. So, hey, I plan on spending $100,000 this year. $100,000, it's in your local bank account. If you don't feel comfortable or you're not able to use like foreign credit cards, then that could be an issue. If you're not an American and you can't keep foreign credit cards in some countries, that could be an issue. But if I'm living on $100,000 a year and I've got bank accounts with $3 million, I'm just going to keep the $3 million somewhere else, and then whatever schedule I determine works with my tax plan and just is operationally efficient, move that money in. So, and again, that's why a salary could work, because maybe some business owners, they'll say, my company made $5 million, I took $2 million in dividends, and I took a $100,000 salary. Well, in that case, if the tax plan supports the $100,000 salary, you bring that to your local bank account, you put the $2 million in dividends into your personal account in a proper asset haven, and then you keep the remaining $3 million in corporate profits in the corporate bank account in a different jurisdiction. So nothing wrong with having local bank accounts, but like, again, if you're moving to Mexico, if you're moving to Turkey, I wouldn't put all my money anywhere. Right? But in terms of banking, I want an asset haven. So are you going to live in Switzerland? Are you going to live in Singapore? Are you going to live in a place like that? Probably not, right? They're difficult to get into, often speaking, or they have higher taxes, or they don't work, you can't work towards citizenship, or just the lifestyle's not as good, whatever. There's many different problems with a lot of these asset havens. Do you want to move to Liechtenstein? Yeah, you could live there. It's a beautiful place. You're probably going to go nuts after about a week, right? And so Mexico's banks, yeah, I think there's some decent banks, but it's not where you're going where you're treated better. It's go where you're treated best. If you're going to go through the hassle of moving your bank account from the U.S. or from Canada or from wherever, why would you move to Mexico, right? Like, take the opportunity to improve, right? It's like, it's a new year, right? Make all your resolutions. You can do anything you want. In the same way that I say, why do you move from Connecticut to Miami to save money on tax when you can move from Connecticut to Costa Rica and save a lot more? Like, why would you go through the hassle of making the move to put all your money in Mexico? I love Mexico. I think it's a nice place to live, but it's just not a place that Mexicans don't want to bank in Mexico on a large scale. And so the best banking countries, you're not going to live there because, again, it's hard to get citizenship, it's hard to get residence, it's too expensive, whatever. And so a citizenship by investment and a good residence permit may also not have very robust options, right? So you go to Singapore, you go to Switzerland, maybe they have $1 million requirement or a $250,000 requirement or $500,000, whatever. You can often invest that money, right? So you can go and open a priority bank account and you say, oh, I don't like keeping my money in cash. Okay, you can fulfill the $1 million requirement. You can put, $950 of it in stocks, and there's your $50,000 liquid to spend and live off of, right? And so you're not going to have that, even in Georgia, for example. You're certainly not going to have that in most banks in the Caribbean. You're not going to have that in a lot of places. There's an investment bank in Portugal, for example, people will sometimes use for the golden visas in that country. And they have some investment options, but it's not really nearly as robust as what you would get if you went to Switzerland or Singapore or even the Cayman Islands or something like that. And so, to the extent that you don't want to keep all your money just sitting in cash, maybe you want to keep it in different investments, you want an asset haven. So let's repeat, you want to live in one place that you want to live in. It could be multiple places, by the way, but you want to live for living's sake. You want to be a citizen for citizenship's sake, right? Probably not where you're living. And then you want to bank for banking's sake. And just understand, right? I mean, this is why we have different friends in our life. We have different friends, right? I have friends who are involved in business. We talk about business. I have friends who are employees, and we just talk about life. It's chill, right? I have friends who are married, friends who are single. Like, you wanted a variety of people in your life that all offer different experiences, right? Some days you don't want to talk about business. That's very seldom for me, but sometimes you want the friend who's not going to talk about business. And so you want the same thing in your life with your money, okay? Don't bank where you live. Don't bank where you're a citizen on a grand scale. And don't think that you have to do that. There are residence programs where you have to put in $50,000 in the bank to get residence. Fine, that's the requirement. You may not want to top it up. You just do the minimum, right? There are citizenship programs, like or golden visas, for example, Portugal. You can put, if you want to spend much more than the minimum, you can just put that money essentially in a bank or a fixed income or something like that, right? And so if you're doing it as the qualification for residence or citizenship, fine. If you're putting your money in St. Lucia's bond program to avoid making a donation for Caribbean citizenship, fine. That doesn't mean open a bank account just because now you're in, so just keep it going. Always use asset havens for banking. Find the best places to bank and find the best places to live.